Welcome to another episode of the magazine. Today we have a great feature. We have the one and only Chris Richard from Fairhaven here. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Charlie, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
That's great. So Chris, can you start up by telling us something of your upbringing and in your connection to the town of Fairhaven?
Well, a long time ago, I was born here, and my parents were both Fairhaven folks. Grew up in Fairhaven, went to Fairhaven High. I was born here, brought up in North Fairhaven, and went to Oxford School, went to Hastings, went to Fairhaven High. And it was fun childhood, and one of the things that probably influenced me during that growing up period, even though I wasn't really aware of it, was my parents' interest in what was going on in town. Dad did things like volunteer for coaching Little League and things like that, but he also was a town meeting member and would talk about what was going on in town. Eventually was elected to the Board of Health for a while. And so that was kind of an influence there. After high school, I went to what is now UMass Dartmouth, and I studied visual design and illustration, graphic arts, and that, along with my first job, is kind of something that still influences my work today.
Tell us something about that, your work experiences.
Well, my first job, I was working at Vining Press in New Bedford, a print shop, a very old print shop that went back to the early 1900s, and it was still even using some letterpress printing with the little pieces of lead type set up in forms and printed that way. So I got in right at the old-fashioned way, but it was also starting to get a little bit more modern. So I started doing artwork for them and printing. When I ended up going to college, I was in graphic design and illustration, and the interesting thing is that we were being taught sort of how to design things, put things together that looked good, typography, all that sort of thing. But the idea with design school is mostly that the graphic designer does it, and then it's turned over to other people who do things like set the type, get it ready to go to the printer, and so on. But I had printing experience in a print shop. So while I was in college, once a year, I would do a little talk to the class about this is what happens once your design piece is done and it goes to the next step and the next step. And that ability to actually not only create designs, but get them ready to run on the press is what has been the most important thing to me throughout the rest of my jobs. I started working in advertising after I graduated from college. I was the advertising coordinator for a Fall River factory outlet store, which had just opened. It was the very beginning of the kind of outlet mall sort of a situation. Before then, you had the little outlet stores in the factories. And then my boss, who ran the raincoat factory in Fall River, rented or bought some mill space and put together a mall with women's outlet and a menswear outlet and a shoe outlet, and they were all together. And I did the advertising for that. And then I got into newspapers. For 5 years, I was at Hathaway Publishing, which was based in Somerset at that time, and they were printing 3 weekly newspapers at that time: the Middleborough Gazette, the Dartmouth Chronicle, and the Somerset Spectator, which was their founding publication. Sid Hathaway, the founder of Hathaway Publishing, was still there in a semi-retired capacity while I was there. So I worked there doing artwork and pasting up ads for the newspapers that they printed. But along the way, I ended up starting to write and edit and contribute political cartoons, and had a fiction column which carried on into later years when I was publishing the Navigator with Lori and I doing that. So my background, one thing that really kind of even more directly led to me being a little bit more qualified for this job when I was first hired, is that Hathaway each year published a special publication called Gateway to Cape Cod, which was a tourist publication. And so it gathered stuff from all over southeastern Massachusetts, and this thing was printed and distributed at visitor centers all over the region all summer long. And I was made the editor of that. So I ended up editing, writing, taking photographs for this tourist publication. So with that, and then print shops, I did other work at print shops locally, and that brought me in contact with most of the Fairhaven groups, both with Vining Press, later with Associated Printers. I was doing printing for house tour brochures for the Historical Society. I designed Homecoming Day Fair posters for the Improvement Association. When Town Hall had its centennial celebration, I did a little illustration of Town Hall that was used on all the letterheads and the program books and things like that. So I got more and more involved with printing for and doing promotion for local organizations that way. And one of those groups that got their things printed at Vining Press while I was there toward the end was the Tourism Committee. And so the Fairhaven Tourism Committee wanted a map that showed some of the places to visit in town, and I ended up designing that as part of my job at Vining Press, little knowing that I'd be continuing to draw similar maps for years and years and years afterward. But so all of that stuff led up to when I applied for the job as the Tourism Committee. I mean, there's more to the story than that, of course. There are a lot of interesting turns along the way. But one other thing, because we'll probably talk about me dressing in costumes and so on, is that I was involved a lot in amateur theater from being in high school plays. Our senior class play, we did MASH, and I was Radar in MASH. And then I worked with the Spouters in your theater and the Village Players and things like that. So being able to present publicly and speak in public and project my voice and dress in silly costumes and things like that has all been background to this. I also ended up, through a series of events, as the caretaker at the Fairhaven Colonial Club. I had been doing a gardening project with Leonard Pierce at what was then called Willow Park. The park is now named after Leonard, and it was an Improvement Association project with putting a garden in there. And when the caretaker at the Colonial Club was leaving, Nancy Perry, who was president of the Colonial Club at that time, asked me if I wanted to move in and install some gardens there, but also trim the hedges, mow the lawn. And it was a live-in position at the Colonial Club, which was a museum full of Fairhaven history and cool stuff too. And Mrs. Hemingway was a member of the Colonial Club, and she was in the Tourism Committee and had been my teacher since first grade, when she came in and started singing songs from Mary Poppins. I remember the first day Natalie Hemingway walked into our classroom at Oxford School when I was in first grade, and Mary Poppins had just come out and she was singing those songs, and it was the coolest thing in the world. Well, a million years later, Natalie is on the Tourism Committee. She wants to design some walking tour brochures, and she wanted some help with researching, writing them, and making a map for them. And so I volunteered to do that. And the next thing I knew, I was sort of being edged into the whole tourism promotion for the town of Fairhaven stuff that was going on there. And it was right at that time in 1995 that the town started collecting the hotel tax. and started an Office of Tourism. And there were 5 people who applied for the job, and I was the lucky one. And I've been here ever since. So all of those background things, from design, writing, taking pictures, the theater stuff, the involvement with the local organizations, and everything has just played so perfectly into what I've been doing with the tourism office since then.
And you mentioned Natalie Hemingway as really a mentor.
She was a mentor. She was on the tourism committee for years. She continued to volunteer, doing walking tours for me. I took over the walking tours that she had done, and we added some of our own. A funny story about that is she suggested the Riverside Cemetery tours. And I said, Natalie, who's gonna want to go walking around in a cemetery? Oh, no, it's good. There's a lot of history in there, and it's a beautiful cemetery. Okay, go ahead. You do your Riverside Cemetery tour. And it turned out to be one of the most popular things. I think the first time we did it, 75 people showed up, and it's a big draw. We're still doing that now. A volunteer of mine, Joanne Zeich, guides those tours now. And so we're still continuing all of the things that Natalie had begun, plus we've added a lot more.
So tell me some of the challenges of being the first tourism director for the town of Fairhaven, and some of the really strong rewards.
Well, the challenges were, we didn't have this department before. Another challenge was, I had worked in private companies and didn't have any experience with governmental stuff and how it works. And the third challenge was when I was hired and they stuck me up in a room at the top of town hall somewhere, I was taught more about how to work the soda machine than about how town government operates. So I had to develop budgets, I had to do all that kind of stuff, learning as I was going along, because I had no experience with that. And this hadn't been done before. So I am still the first tourism director for the town. Everything that the Office of Tourism has been doing has basically been, with some suggestions and support of others, has been my stuff. So there was a lot to do. And the first thing I did was we needed to have something to hand out to people when they got here. The tourism office has a few different sorts of duties that it's supposed to fulfill. One is to create advertising to bring people into Fairhaven. The other one is to provide them with information once they get here, to operate a visitor center, have brochures and maps and things in stock. And then another one is, that's been developed over the years, is actually providing some of the events that are also kind of attractions too, in the walking tours and other things. So we didn't have a handout sheet, and the first thing I did was I created a visitor's guide. And this is it. It's one sheet of paper. This is an original.
25 years old.
25 years old, 1996 Fairhaven Visitor's Guide. It was one sheet of paper, and it lists the beaches. It lists the museums, which was at that time the Cogswell Memorial, this Museum of Fairhaven History that we're sitting in right now, and the Nemasket Gallery was an art gallery in the Nemasket building. And it's got something about the accommodations, the marinas, it lists all the churches, the parks, and then there are some emergency numbers. So this was the number one thing to do. And we printed these up, and then I started working on some other brochures and so on. Another challenge was we had a lot of history in town, but the biggest stories were primarily Henry Huddleston Rogers, which is probably the biggest story. There was the fact that we had a pilgrim here. And the Joshua Slocum Centennial, right behind me is the model of the spray here. And so in 1995, it was the 100th anniversary of Joshua Slocum setting sail around the world. So people knew that story, the Mandro story, and the Henry Rogers story. But Henry more or less eclipsed everything. And there was a whole lot of other history that we could promote. Don Bernard had started promoting Fort Phoenix history. He had started a reenacting group, and they did a few battle reenactments, but he had passed away before I was hired. So nobody was doing that at the time. The Historical Society at that time was kind of in a rut. They weren't doing any programs. The Mandro Society was promoting the Mandro story, but it was a very specific story. So I decided, well, we've got to start developing and promoting other things. And so I designed a series of brochures, one about Henry Rogers, one about the Delano family. I have some of them here. Joshua Slocum, Mandro, and so on. So that all of these we started designing and writing and printing these for the Office of Tourism. There's a Riverside Cemetery one, which we handed out with Natalie's tour as well. And those are all still available in print. So there was that challenge of just getting everything together. It was something that we were doing, and we did not have at that time a Henry Huddleston Rogers walking tour. Even though he was our biggest guy, Natalie's walking tour in the center of town was a very general walking tour, and it talked about a lot of things that tourists from town wouldn't really be interested in. Captain so-and-so lived in this house, and so on. The founder of Brown's Pharmacy was over here. And so the first year I was in the office, I developed the Henry Huddleston Rogers walking tour, and we started offering that free of charge once a week in the summertime. And those are still going on today. So that tour is one I developed myself.
Which brings up a good point, Chris. We've all just endured a pandemic and hopefully in the final phases of it. What kind of services have you been able to maintain during this trying time?
Well, we have been lucky that some of the programs that we do in the summertime could, in fact, continue. By the time we got to summer last year, it was at the beginning of the pandemic, but there were certain things that were allowed under the governor's orders. One of those was a very limited sort of historical program, as long as people were staying in place and were socially distanced. And so the Pirates and Privateers program, which we do on Friday mornings at Fort Phoenix in the summer, was able to continue. We could do that every single Friday. The walking tours had to be eliminated. They were not allowed under the governor's orders. I'll talk about the fact that they are now allowed and what we're going to be doing. But I replaced those with more online material that people could use to guide themselves around on Henry Huddleston Rogers tours or whatever. We have brochures available. We've got the guidebook. Now, the first visitor's guide was this piece of paper. And the ones that got delivered yesterday are this one here. This is now a 24-page guidebook. It has a map about Henry Rogers and his buildings. It's got a Walking Poverty Point section. It's got all sorts of things that you can do and see without having somebody guiding you around on a tour. So these, well, thank you. Those were available and increased the online presence. The Huddleston Marketplace could continue because it was certified as a farmer's market, and those were considered essential under the governor's orders. They were never closed down at all. And so last summer, the Huddleston Marketplace every Saturday grew and flourished and was quite large. This summer, as of a couple of days ago, we're completely full for the whole season. We've got 138 vendors signed up. There will be 68 or 69 every single week all summer here. And that's as many as I can fit right now because we're still doing a COVID-related thing. When I started doing another fair here once a year, the Harvest Fun Day fair, and I started having booths set up. A booth is 10 feet wide, and I'd allow basically 11 feet per booth. So there's a little bit on either side, and they were all right up against each other. With COVID, I had to change that. So last year when I was setting up for the Huddleston Marketplace, we added 7 feet of space between each booth. Well, that was nice for COVID, and it made it a nice, airy-looking market, but it cut out a whole lot of space that I could put booths in. More people were joining because a lot of the big fairs and festivals were canceled, and there were arts and crafts people who wanted a booth. And so it filled up, and I was having 50, 60 booths a week, but that was the limit. On the last day of the year, I had so many signed up that we did open up a new little area behind the high school where the Memorial Brick Park is. The Huddleston Marketplace is basically on the west lawn of the high school and the lawn in front of the visitor center, but now it extends into the Memorial Brick Park area there. And this year, that whole thing is completely full. If COVID relents and we can move the booths back together closer, we might want to leave a little space. It's nice with a little extra space, but we might be able to fit in more people in the future. But for now, we're as done as we can be with that. It's going to be a great season. Yes. We've got a lot of people lined up for that.
When does that start, Chris?
It'll start May 22nd, Saturday, May 22nd. It's every Saturday here at the Visitor Center from 10 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. Goes to September 18th.
September 18th, okay. And it's rain or shine?
It's rain or shine. Sometimes when it rains, not everybody shows up. A lot of the vendors are veterans of marketplaces and farmers markets, and so they're prepared to be out in the rain. Some don't show up, but it isn't canceled unless there's a hurricane that's about to hit that morning, or we've had a couple over the years that have been canceled due to intense heat, and it wasn't just me saying, wow, it's really hot, we won't do this. This was like the National Weather Service saying it's dangerous to be out in the heat. And for somebody coming to shop for half an hour, that's not a big deal. But to people who have to be out there for 8 whole hours all day, it was dangerous. So we do that. Now, this year, just as of this week, I've been in discussion with my other tour guide for the Rogers tours, and Bob Foster and I are going to be offering again a modified version of the Henry Huddleston Rogers walking tour. And those will be Tuesday mornings and Thursday mornings, June, July, August, and September. And they start at the town hall. They'll be shorter, and there's not going to be as much walking down the sidewalk. There'll be sort of a group gathering on the town hall lawn. We'll talk there for a while. We'll cross the street and talk at the library for a while without going inside anywhere, and then move over to the Unitarian Church lawn. And so instead of trailing a line of people through the sidewalks around the center of town, this is going to be shorter, and it's going to be with safe social distancing and so on. So that will be starting at the beginning of June.
Oh, great. So,
think-
you mentioned about you being in costume. So you're an actor.
I'm an actor, so I'm one of the people who dresses as a pirate. This is my kid here, and this is another volunteer, Erin, who portray pirates and privateers with me. But the costume thing, it started out when I was guiding walking tours, and I thought, it should be, the tour guide should stand out somehow. And so with the Henry Huddleston Rogers walking tour, I threw together a quick costume, black pants, a vest. I might have had a top hat. And I had these black loafers that were kind of old beat up black loafers. And I wore them. And I was guiding the tour one day. And this was right at the very beginning, maybe 1997. And Jay Simmons' mom came out of the library and she looked down at my shoes and she said, "Those are not historically correct shoes." And I took that to heart and I started doing a lot more serious research on how I was dressing. And so now the costumes that we wear, whether we're doing colonial reenacting at Fort Phoenix, pirates and privateers, or just walking around in the center of town like this, is a little more historically accurate.
Well, Chris, you've done a great job. 25 years is a long time, and 25 more to go.
I don't think so. I don't know that we have a minimum retirement age, though, so I could go on for a while. I'm having fun, and that's the interesting thing, is that I've got a lot on my plate. There's a lot of stuff to do in various areas, but I really look forward to it. It's fun to get up and come into work and see people. One of the interesting things is that, when people go to town hall, they go to the tax collector's office, they go somewhere like that, they're not in a really good frame of mind sometimes because, nobody wants to pay their taxes. Nobody wants to have to get their building permit. I'm a town government official who sees people who are on vacation and they want to have fun and they're happy and they like seeing me, and that's really what this is all about. We welcome people to Fairhaven and show them a good time when they're here.
So, Chris, how would someone get in touch with you or the tourism department here? How would they go about doing that?
There are lots of ways. Fairhaventours.com is the website. And if you can remember fairhaventours.com, that has the phone number, the email address. You can call town hall as well. I get calls for most other town departments because my phone number is in more advertising and all over the place anyway. And there's funny stuff. I know we're running way over time, but because we guide Riverside Cemetery tours and my phone number gets connected with Riverside Cemetery tours, at least once a month somebody calls the tourism office because they want Dad cremated. And I have to say, excuse me, you've reached the wrong number. Let me give you the correct one.
Well, Chris, I want to say thank you very much for this great interview and great knowledge that you have, tremendous knowledge that you have for the town of Fairhaven, and for keeping us going in these trying times and having tourism still a big part of Fairhaven. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Charlie.